Hello, Locked On Guardians listeners. Doing this back to back. I want to thank you for making Locked On Guardians your first listen, free and available today on all podcasting platforms, apps, and services. Wherever you get podcasts, you can get us for free every day. Well, it's the off season, so 3 days a week. We are there for you. And hey, wherever you get us, why don't you leave a review? That really helps the show grow. Again, I'll just say download daily. That's the other thing. Those are your two tasks. That's what I ask with this show. If you missed the first episode of the week, it explains the difference in sound quality. I'm assuming most people listen, but if you did not listen, my father is very ill, and I'm driving back home to say goodbye. So that is the situation which is happening. If you want more details, again, go listen to Monday. We're going to dive right into this because I only got through 3 positions and barely 3 positions on this series that I'm doing, which is looking at the Indians, kind of looking at what there is now, what upgrades could be available, a sleeper, and who is there to look at in the future 5 years from now at the position. Now, this is all off the top of my head. Again, you can go back and listen to Mondays. It explains that, but since I have to record these while driving, I'm staring ahead. I am not distracted or looking at data while I do this. I am paying attention to the road as I talk to myself. So I can only use what's on in my head. So this is purely me with no support, no help, no anything. This is just top of my head speech, my own internal knowledge. And as I mentioned, we talked about the catcher, first base, and second base position. So we will lead off with the all-important position of shortstop. Now, we know the Indians place high value on this position. It is interesting that in the minors, they have been all about the defense first at this position. And then in the majors, they have a slightly below average defender there. If we're being honest. And Ahmed Rosario, it's also interesting because he is on the same timeline in terms of free agency as Ian Happ would be if the Indians got him in a trade, and also Jose Ramirez. All these guys have 2 years left on their current deals and or arbitrations. Rosario last year was about a league average bat. He would have hot stretches and down stretches, and it was a good year, but with him being a shortstop, his overall value, I believe, was under 2 WAR with Fangraphs because defensively, he was a negative at the position. It's not to say that he was terrible, but he was not very good there either. Going from Lindor to Rosario was a drop. Now, I talked about this before, that if you put Jimenez there, based on the data we had in the strike-shortened season, Jimenez was a stronger defender whose bat had been slightly better in 2020 than Lindor's. So what do I think is going to happen here? Again, we have Rosario, who is, he is what he is. I don't think when you have a guy who's had this many years in the big leagues, this many reps, I don't think you can expect a sudden change. I don't think we can expect him to all of a sudden blossom. I mean, there are a few underlying indicators that show maybe. And again, he debuted very young, so he is a player with that. So it is unlikely but possible. He's not a player where you can just shut the book on, I think. And I don't know if there is that degree of fear. And honestly, it's like, in terms of Rosario, if he breaks out, how much more is his trade value in July? Now, if he is the same guy he was, how much lower is his trade value in July? I don't think his trade value gets lower. I think he would have to really bomb for that to happen. There is a chance. And right now, trade value, it's relative. We talked about if he was traded to the Mets, for instance, to play second base. Was it the Mets? No, because I wouldn't trade him back to the Mets. I'm trying to remember the deal where I recently shipped him off to someone to get, multiple pieces back. Was it really the Mets? It's something like Dom Smith. Well, I can't remember where I shipped him recently. But there was a deal where he had him. Maybe it was the Yankees. That was it. It was the Yankees for Luke Voigt and not Torre. Maybe it was Torre. No, it was Gallo and Voigt. There we go. I got there. So Gallo and Voigt for Rosario. Sign me up tomorrow for that one. That's 2 big upgrades. Even with Gallo walking at the end of the year. But he does have that trade value. If some of the underlying data is true and he does break out, his trade value jumps a lot. So I kind of get waiting to the deadline, but really I don't expect him. I mean, if this team is contending, maybe then you just ride it out and then consider the offseason, because you have so much infield depth. It depends on how big the breakout is and how much you believe in it. But remember, he's only here for this and next season. So right now, there is part of me that wonders if they're waiting to see where the shortstop musical chairs ends and then making that trade for a team that could use one, like the Yankees potentially. But right now we have to operate with him as their likely shortstop. Jimenez, I think, is the likely number 2. Future, I'm still high on Gabriel Arias, and I think they are too. I know there's a lot of talk about potentially trading him, especially with guys like Rocchio. I talked about it the future of second base, Ty Freeman. These players coming up. Arias is the best defender of the list, or Arias, I should say, is the best defender of all the shortstops in the system. What he has done across each level is pretty amazing when you look at his age relative to level. I mean, he skipped Double-A. Don't forget that. He's about a year older than Rocchio. Most of what Rocchio did this year was in high A. Now, Rocchio was amazing in Double-A when he got up. But when you look the other side of that, then you got, what Gabriel Arias did in Triple-A all year without, first time in the minors. And he got better as the year went, and he's the best defender, and he's got legitimate plus power potential. There are some gaps in his game, but there's star potential written all over him, and he was the center of that Clevenger trade. I've said that since day one. He is the centerpiece, and was the centerpiece for the Indians when they made that move. That was the shortstop of the future. They went out and got him in that moment. We'll see if we see him this year, but I don't think they have any interest in trading him. I know there's discussion, again, because of all of the shortstop, and what's the point of sending him back down to AAA? But I think until they move on from Rosario, he's kind of stuck there. Sleeper. I mean, can there be a shortstop sleeper? I talked about Jose Fermin for second base in this system / organization. I'm just trying to think about recent draft picks, because you kind of have to go there. It's Carson Tucker didn't have the best year with health. You think internationally. It's who across the levels is maybe, not getting, there's all the big names, the guys like Angel Martinez and the that they signed for those big contracts. Can I just cheat and make this Fermin again, just because he's lower down the list and played some second base and some shortstop? He's more utility. I'm going to. I don't have a great answer because we know all these guys. Is it Jose Tena? I mean, maybe one could, but he's on the 40-man. And he just had that scorching AFL. I don't know what you necessarily put there. But that is our shortstop preview. We'll take a quick break here, come back, and talk third base. You're going to get to hear if I think Jose Ramirez is with this team in 5 years or not. So definitely stay tuned for that. And our sponsor is BuiltBar.com. You know I love Built Bar. If you've listened to 5 episodes of the show, you've likely heard me talk about Built Bar on at least 1 to 2 of them. And you know that pretty much from the day Built Bar became one of our sponsors, it is a product I spend my own money on. They sent us a starter box. The taste was free. Now I'm hooked. Why am I hooked? It is delicious. It is the best tasting protein bar I've ever had. And they do that while being incredibly healthy. You sit there and you get a bar with under 10 grams of sugar while getting 15 to 18 grams of protein. Your caloric intake is, I don't know off the top of my head, but it's under 300 a bar, I want to say. Long story short, it's good for you. It's delicious. What more do you need? Go to BuiltBar.com, use the promo code LOCKED15, and remember, if they have a bar that's already on sale, that 15% goes on top of their discount. You can double up discounts and use the promo code LOCKED15. Do us a favor by using it, do yourself a favor by using it, and getting the best protein bar money can buy. Okay, third base. So obviously Jose Ramirez, I don't really need to discuss that. In terms of upgrade, no. I mean, unless you're going to, who are the upgrades? Who are legitimately better at third base than Jose Ramirez right now? It's not a big list, if it is a list at all. And honestly, I would say that he is right now the best third baseman in baseball. That is my statement. Braves fans, go ahead and get mad and leave a 1-star review telling me how Austin Riley is better. That has happened, for those who did not know. We did get that occurring over on the iTunes. In terms of future of the position, I already talked about Nolan Jones likely moving to first. Part of me has thought at points that Gabriel Arias, even though he's the best defender at short, he's also the strongest arm, that maybe he's a third baseman long term. That could be a position in terms of where he ends up if they decide to keep someone like Jimenez at short, if he can prove himself and kind of bounce back to where he was in 2020. Those are very much possibilities, because we know the Indians also like continuity. So like if someone like Jimenez were to step up and take over that position, he might just stay there, even if they have other options. Continuity matters to this organization. So who else do we got? Who else must we talk about in terms of the Cleveland Indians and third base? Who is the future? Who's going to be? Do we think it's going to be Jose Ramirez in 5 years? Who? I still think no. And the reason I still think no is, they might sign a contract, but I feel like, okay, so right now he is heading into, his 30s. There's potential for opt-outs in any contract. I guarantee you he will have opt-outs probably around his age 33 or 34 year. And if he is performing well, he's going to want to opt out and get a bigger contract. And there's no way they're going to pay him in his mid-30s big money. So I am going to bet no. I still think there's a chance for an extension, but I still think any extension is likely to come with an opt-out, with a good chance that if he opts out further into his 30s, the Indians say, we can't pay someone in their 30s, tens of millions of dollars. So that's me hedging my bet, okay? That's me cheating here. If it's not him, then who do we think takes over? Who is kind of the third baseman of the future? Now, there's not, Nolan Jones is the third baseman, quote unquote, in the system. We discussed how I think he's more of a first baseman, probably long term for the Indians. In terms of third base, we're probably considering one of these infielders who needs to shift. If we already got, maybe I should say Rocchio here and Ty Freeman at second. I think most people know I am not as high on Freeman as most, just because I worry about his profile. It is the long story short, you can go listen to the podcast where I've talked about this multiple times, but hit first guys are not for me. And hit first without any real secondary skill. I mean, maybe Ty Freeman will prove me wrong. He's proved me wrong at every step through the minors. I didn't love that as a draft pick. I believe in my redraft, I had Trevor Stephan there. So, maybe I'll be wrong again, as I have been with Freeman. But I compared Freeman and Francisco Mejia, and they have kind of similar profiles where it's all about batting average. And the strength of your offensive production has to be based on your ability to get bloop singles and get the ball in play, and high BABIPs. And the minors are a great sign of future success because they're high contact rates. But you have to have secondary skills to kind of build off that. And Freeman doesn't have power. He doesn't have a walk rate. He's limited as a defender. So, he wouldn't be a third baseman. But I right now, just looking at this team, I'm going to put Jose Tena as the third baseman of the future. I think he's got the arm and everything to handle it. They obviously like him. If you're out there like, what about Johnsky Noel? I'm leaning more towards him as the DH of the future. Maybe he's the first baseman, and he kind of enters this debate as well. I don't think he's a third baseman. I don't think he's there. Like I said, probably more DH for me, long term for Johnsky Noel. John Kenzie, I should say, Noel. So yeah, I'm gonna say Tena there right now. Just in terms of who they have in the grouping and who I kind of think is more likely to be able to have the arm to handle the position. I know, now I've got all these people mad at me. I know. I understand that my Freeman takes are very hot and very few agree with me. And you're probably out there being like, he's number one prospect on this list. I don't care. That is fair. That is everyone's assessment. I long ago learned to stop looking at lists. Everyone does great work. I really respect all of my colleagues in the field. I think everyone is fantastic, but groupthink enters way, way, way too much. And, I spend a lot of time looking at where I failed in the past and where I've been successful and trying to grow and learn and get better at this. And Freeman's profile is just one that scares me to death. So that's that. Now, moving back, let's move to center field. You have Miles Straw. I believe they still have him. In 5 years, he's your center fielder. Just look right now at what teams want. How many teams need a center fielder? What a trade that was by the Indians, trading a player who would need to, Yonder Diaz would need to be added to the 40-man. I don't think he was added by Houston either, but there's a chance that he'd be taken. He is probably a first base DH, not a catcher, even though that's what he was. He's a sleeper prospect. He would have been a sleeper type for me when we're talking about that on this. He's an interesting prospect. I get why the Astros like him. He's also a guy you just leave a catcher and let him keep hitting in the minors, and it could elevate his trade value as well. Like, he's a guy that you buy low, and then next year his value could be significantly higher. So there's that. So Diaz went out, and then Maton hadn't been able to establish himself consistently. Now, he wasn't used a whole lot. He didn't seem to have Tito's confidence, so there is that. But he did not establish. So to get Miles Straw in center field with all the teams that need center field help, and with the market having nothing left, and just the world being what it is in terms of center field options, it is ugly for a team trying to find a center fielder right now. That was a phenomenal deal the Indians made. Even if Straw regresses and becomes like the high 80s runs created plus, a below league average bat for the most part, with his defense, you are totally fine with that. And he is a top defender at that position in baseball. Kevin Kiermaier without power is potentially a comp. So there we are at center field. I don't have to do a player of the future because he is the guy who will be there in 5 years. He has that much control. I think you just kind of don't worry about that. The natural, I think, center fielder up would probably be Petey Halpin. If you're going to look 5 years right after that, I think he's the center fielder I have the most faith in, staying at the position and playing well there. Sleeper in center field. Is it Alex Call, potentially? I don't know if he's going to get taken in the Rule 5. I don't know what his future really holds, if he's even going to be someone who, I think at some point he gets a cup of coffee in the big leagues. But he's a small school guy who just keeps playing well and hitting and performing, and he's made it impossible for himself to be completely written off. And when you go and you look at top level performers of players who played center field, he was in the top 20 last year in the upper minors. So there's your deep sleeper. We're going to take a commercial break. We'll come back and talk about the corners, and we'll talk about the DH position. BetOnline.ag, our good friends over at BetOnline.ag, they have been with us for just shy of a year now, and if you are someone who likes to gamble, that is your place to go. Why? Because they have you covered no matter your sport, even if I don't know why you would listen to this podcast and not like sports, maybe you're a member of my family, but if you didn't like sports, you can bet on, you can go and do casino games, you can do poker, you can bet on politics, anything you can imagine. You're going to want to go check out the brand new website and interface, download the app, go to their newly designed website over at betonline.ag. They have you covered, and when you go, you want to use the promo code LOCKEDON, because that's going to get you a 50% bonus on your first deposit. Who doesn't want 50% more on what they put in? Go to BetOnline today. Check it out for yourself. That is betonline.ag. Remember, that promo code is LOCKED15. So, corner outfield. How do we feel about the Indians in the corner outfield right now, heading into next year? I mean, can you feel all that great? I mean, it's Franmil Reyes is getting reps in Winter League. You've got Zimmer and Mercado still on roster. How much do you believe in Steve Kwan? A lot of this is kind of there. Like, how much do you think Kwan and Jones could potentially be outfielders? How much can they help? Those are probably your best internal options. We're hoping they'll get active in the trade market. Jess Winkler's name keeps coming up. He is on the same free agent path as Jose Ramirez and Ian Happ and Ahmed Rosario. They're all 2 years out. Problem with Winkler is he needs a platoon partner. We talked about the Nolan Jones of it all. I mean, Jess Winkler might be the high-end outcome for Nolan Jones, where he is just monstrous against one side and then really bad against the other. Jess Winkler, he would probably be pissed and wouldn't want to stay with your organization if he had to platoon, but he should. His numbers would be so much better if he only faced half the platoon, because it's a significant split there. He is also a very bad defender, so there are those two things that kind of limit him in terms of acquiring. Ian Happ is kind of, like I said, he's the interesting acquisition in terms of his history with Chris Valleca, the Indians' new hitting coach. Valleca, We know that he worked with him a lot previously, so there is that. There's Mullins and there's Reynolds, but are they willing to pay that price? Are they willing to go and pay high amounts of money not money, I should say, high prospect costs to get those two players when, it's not like Reynolds was really good in 19. 20 is a weird year, but he was really bad in 20. 21, he was great. What is he? How comfortable do you feel? Mullins was, he's a very interesting under-the-radar prospect. I had a buddy who completely has fallen off the map. Adam, I hope you're well. Maybe you're listening to this. But Adam did some prospect writing, and I'm not going to say what team I'm pretty sure he's with now, but he went and joined a team and destroyed all of his social medias. But before that, he had been with the Orioles, and I remember being like, so what do you got on him? And he's like, well, I don't want to, he had just a general view that I respect about not leaking information. But he's just like, we believe in him, we like him. And he was an interesting player, because when he got to and had that big breakout in AA, he was not someone who was on my radar at all. At the same time, I feel like him and Trey Mancini were both on that AA. Gosh, why am I blanking on their AA affiliate right now? It's like, no, the Squirrels are the Giants. It's like, what are the teams I used to hate when they came to town because it was a really bad prospect team? It was a bunch of retreads who used to play with the Arrows 2 years ago. The Flying Squirrels were one, but it was not them. This was a different team, and I'm just having a moment. But if you want to say he was even back in the day of Trey Mancini on that team. Now, Trey Mancini, another interesting trade candidate with the Orioles. Trade him. I mean, he's just kind of his own thing because of what he's had to overcome and what he means to that city and that organization and everything else. He is also, I believe, just 2 years left. So there's a logic to it. I would love to see that. I think a trade is smart, especially if you can go 3 or 4 for 1. And you can clear 2 40-man spots, and then, like I said, maybe trade 2 guys that you'd have to debate in a year. You really have to start looking at that who's going to have to be added next year list as much as who's on it now, because it gets worse in a year. So looking at that, being forward-thinking is important in general. So that's one of the things that come to mind. Under the radar guys, I talked about the Marlins just last week and why I like quite a few of the players there, why I think Garrett Cooper is really interesting. Jesus Sanchez, we talked Griffin Conine in passing and why I don't think he's that interesting. But Brian Anderson, there's some names to be had, some guys a little bit maybe not as big of a name, especially because the more you hear, the more it seems that they are likely to look for more outfield help, which means, like I said again, if Garrett Cooper stays healthy, that guy's been in an elite end of production when healthy. That's the big what if with him. So it's kind of the usual names. It's like, what outfielder have we not discussed who's legitimately available? By now, I think we've talked about them all. There's not much left. And again, I'll just point out, for as much as there's this tendency to be like, oh, well, this guy can't handle short, let's move to third. They struggle at third, let's move to the outfield. Anyone can play outfield. I just want to point out that outfielders went off the market as quickly as starting pitching because those are hard positions to fill. Outfield is not an easy position to fill anymore. This is not the 90s. This is not bats everywhere. And outfielders are not quite the renewable resource they once were. And, I can go back to that list of top Indians outfielders by WAR drafted since 2000. It's a Luke Scott is still number 1 on that list. It's not a strong list. Ryan Church, I believe, is still number 2. You're talking Ben Francisco's, you're talking Bradley Zimmer, you're talking Tyler Naquin. That might be the 5 names on that list, honestly. But it's been ugly for them, and we'll see if it changes. Now, future in the outfield, you have to feel like George Valera is one with what he has done, the way he's moved up the system, and just his overall production. I know he's spent a lot of time in center. I think, like most, I expect him to end up in a corner long term. I think that is the smart thinking. And then with the other outfield spot, in 5 years, if they still have Miles Straw, I'm a big believer in Petey Halpin. Maybe Steve Kwan is going to be able to just sit down and really take over that spot. Maybe Nolan Jones gets a shot out there and is able to stick in outfield long term. there are a lot of interesting internal choices, a lot of players. I think, I'm going to be aggressive. I'm going to say Richie Palacios and George Valera. I'm going to think that Palacios has done so many things. Again, bloodlines, athleticism, the missed time and what he did after missed time coming from a small program is unheard of. Sometimes he's a little discounted because, the best part of his season was the first half. But it's natural for a guy to slow down a little bit, maybe, after not having really played in 2 years. I think that's something to not be overlooked. So yeah, those are my corner outfielders of the future. Sleepers. It's that does get interesting. Like, who qualifies as a sleeper now? Like, is it like maybe Isaiah Green, who's a little bit forgotten about from that Lindor trade? An interesting guy, bat first type, who was like the fourth piece, I think, in that deal, potentially. Maybe that's an interesting sleeper. Really good athletic tools. He was a second round pick who was paid like a third round pick. Remember, he got less money in the same draft than Petey Halpin, even though he went higher, because the Mets were conserving bonus money for other players. That's kind of how they operated. So he's an interesting guy. I feel like probably someone that people don't think about quite as much. More thinking about the it's like the outfield mix to me. It's Petey Halpin, it's Richie Palacios, it's Steve Kwan, it's George Valera. Those are like the really interesting high-end guys for me right now. So that's kind of the grouping. So Isaiah Green, my sleeper. Moving to DH, we have Fran Mill. I don't think you really look to upgrade there. The only question becomes, like, can Fran Mill play more in the outfield? And if Fran Mill can move into the outfield, if you're okay, and again, this is a team that played Domingo Santana in the outfield, I think Fran Mill can carry that level of defensive value, which is not high. They put Mike Freeman and Michael Martinez out there at points. I think Fran Mill can be somewhere around there. He's got more experience than any of those people had. The question will always come down to, there's been talk the past few years about his staying in shape. He's a big guy. Will he come to camp in great shape or not after a lockout? That is the big concern. He's going to hit. If he's healthy, he'll hit 40 home runs. That's just a matter of time. Future, I think it's Johnsky Noel. What he did this past year was eye-opening. So much so they protected him, even though no player who played first or third base who had not yet played in Double-A or higher had been selected in the last decade plus of the Rule 5. What he did was so eyebrow raising, so made you pay attention that they went out and protected him, even though he seemed incredibly unlikely to be protected. Even though they had someone like Joey Cantillo that seems like a very good chance to be lost in the draft, they didn't want to risk Noel. So that says a lot there. I think he is kind of the future at that position. Sleeper, who's the guy who just hits? This is where I would love to just kind of stare at a box score and go through, not box scores, but just the level statistics, go through and be like, oh, here's an interesting name. Here's a guy who you're not talking about, who just seems to hit and hit and hit, but does not get the high acclaim as some of the other players. Going through, just thinking about this organization in general. So this might be cheating, but if he hits, I feel like Ty Freeman is the sleeper for DH. And that's the reason he's a sleeper there, is no one considers him a future DH because he doesn't have power. Now, at the same time, you just want your best hitter. It doesn't matter. And if you're looking at this Indians team and you're looking at that core group of Tenya, Rocchio, Andres Jimenez, Arias, the worst defender, the lowest upside as a defender in that group is Freeman. So if you're going to put the best defensive team on the field, if you're going to look at someone whose hit tool could allow them to be an unusual DH, I think it's Ty Freeman. And I don't think he's necessarily a bad defender. I think he's probably a 50, 55, but I feel like most of those guys I mentioned have the potential to be somewhere between 60 to 70 at the position. So he's just a step below them. He is still someone who would be totally able to play that for many organizations. But for the Indians, I think there's some wiggle room there. So that is our profile. Now, sleepers, and the like, all extemporaneous, all top of my head. Tell me what you think. Remember to rate and review, download daily. That helps our show to grow. I've been Jeff Ellis. I want to thank you again for making Locked On Guardians your first listen, free and available today, wherever it is you get podcasts. And as we say, go, go, Guardians, go.